This should be fun. We have a great panel. And I want to introduce, starting on my left, your right, is Paul Hinckley. Next to him is Lenny Haig. Next to him is George Hinckley. Next to him is Jean Nurse Gravillis. And then last but certainly not least is Tom Sweeney. What I want to do is just give a little background to the north end of Medfield, this area of Harding, and then I'm going to turn it over to those who grew up in Harding. We have one other member that was supposed to be here, but has been sick, and that's Doug Werner, and he did leave me some of the notes that I'll throw out, and I'm sure the panel maybe can comment on some of that as well. But really, when you talk about Harding, you have to go back when Medfield State Hospital first opened. And Medfield State Hospital first opened in 1896, and one of the first impacts it had on the town was the creation of a new economic center that began to develop its own identity. And the north end of town, in that area from the junction, West Mill and Adams Street, up along Harding Street, Hospital Road, that whole area, the north end of town, up to the hospital itself, became known as Harding. A large number of hospital employees and staff created an economic need in that area. Now, built in Harding, back in around the turn of the century, Tom, you probably remember this. Yeah. Built in Harding were a number of stores, tea rooms, lunch rooms, inns, reported houses of ill repute, and rated gas stations. Their existence was dependent upon the hospital. Early on, the North End also had its own school. Now, the very first North School was built back in 1732. Another school was added in 1761 at the corner of North and Harding Street. It was replaced in 1803, when actually that school was moved to the area of West and West Mill Streets, where it still is today part of what's called Schoolhouse Park. The 1803 school was taken away in 1849, and a new North School was built on the corner of North and School Streets. This school was later called the Lowell Mason School, and remained in use until 1920. And I know when George Hinckley, old George, gave me the older George.
I was principal.
He said he attended school there, in that school. It was later destroyed by fire.
George, in which he lived.
Also to be built the same year that the hospital officially opened, in 1896, was the post office for this new economic center, and it was established for the convenience of the asylum, as was then called, and the neighborhood. It was given the name Harding in honor of one of the town's oldest families, who lived on what is today Harding Street. The post office, made out of stone, is still standing. It's right on the corner of Harding Street and Hospital Road, to Hospital Road. There were actually a couple of other post offices. They went back and forth, depending upon the rent. If they could get a cheaper rent, they actually would then move the post office. The very first postmaster was Albert Lovell, and he remained there in the post office until 1903, when a new postmaster, Herbert Hudson, feeling that the rent on the stone post office was too high, rotated the post offices between two wooden buildings. One was what we recognize by 82 Harding Street, and the other was actually across the street. And George, remember it was at Wolford's?
Well, Wolford's store for a while was a post office.
So you had them back and forth. Starting in 1934, Tom Sweeney Sr. became the new postmaster, appointed by President Franklin Roosevelt. Tom would serve as the Harding postmaster for the next 38 years until President Richard Nixon closed the post office in June of 1972. That's what you get for being a Democrat. During those 38 years, the population of the hospital would continue to grow, and actually at some time periods, the population of the hospital was actually larger than the town itself. The Harding Post Office served upwards of 1,000 patrons who lived in Harding. The post office itself was demolished in 2004. And over time, the state hospital, as you know, has been closed. Large number of new residents have moved to the area, and that identity of Harding in the north end of town has faded away. But for many, the 02042, which was the zip code up there, always brings to mind the little rustic post office on Harding Street. And for many who grew up in Harding, their official address, when asked, will always be Harding, Mass. So let me start with our panel, maybe just kicking off. What do you remember most about growing up in Harding? What was it like being a kid growing up there? What do you remember? We'll start maybe with Paul.
I can always remember the patients coming down on Halloween trick-or-treat. But besides that, we had all the ice skating ponds up there, the old mill pond where the ice house was. They used to bring ice to our house, in fact, right out of that. In the farm, the state hospital, the farm, everybody worked up there. In the old junction, the railroad station, we could hop on a train to go anywhere back in those days. We could go to Boston both ways. We had 2 buses in town, a couple of taxis. But then we grew up and did away with all of them.
Lenny, anything you remember particularly about growing up as a kid?
Well, my grandfather was Herbert Hudson, the man that became postmaster. And my father, he used to come out from Boston. He was a city boy. And they'd come out by canoe, and up behind where the powerhouse is, they had what they call, this is on the Charles River, the Narrows. And they'd come out there on groups, and from there, they looked up for food, and they went down to the general store in Harding, and that's where he met my mother. Because Herbert Hudson had 2 daughters, my mother was one of them.
Where was the general store?
Right across from the old post office.
That was Wolfen,
Yeah.
Wolfen store.
Old
Later.
store.
Yeah.
And so that's, you know, I don't remember any of that naturally, but, you know. I might be that old, I might be old, not quite that old. So that's how my mother and father got together. And then my father, he was pretty good at pitching baseball. There you go. And they found out about that up to the Medfield State Hospital. Well, whoever was running the team up there, you know, we got a little tryout. We'd like to have you pitch on the weekends. And we'll give you $20. Well, my father was working, he wasn't making anywhere near $20. He'd come out, pitch a game, and make a $20 bill. I don't know. How they covered him is he might have been an employee for the Sundays or what, I don't know. Doc Browning? He was there, when we were there. Yeah, so that's, you know, kind of like part of the little history for us. That's great.
George, growing up, what do you remember about?
I went to the North End School up there, and I found out tonight. we had a hell of a reunion. Well, we did have a good upbringing there in Harding. Like the Medfield State Hospital was our playground, more or less. They had everything up there. We were always welcome, and we were well behaved, right, Gene?
Right.
Never get caught.
We'd have a movie every Friday night up there. And they didn't even have a theater here in Medfield, but we had our own. And they'd have dances. We were always invited there. On Halloween, they had a big party at the hospital. were always welcome. They made beautiful donuts up there like that. And, yeah, we're always welcome. We knew most of the patients' names and the people that worked there. They're all fine people. And used to use the word mental, but not all of them were mental up there. They were just homeless souls, and very kind. They wouldn't bother you at all. In fact, I don't think any of us right here locked our doors in half.
Never locked the door.
No, probably didn't have a key. You're right, Jane. Oh, Daddy's not home yet. But, no, it was wonderful. And like we said, Wolford's store, it was a post office for a while. And I was just a little wanderer at the time. I don't know, I couldn't have been 6 years old, but my mother used to take me over there for treats. And
What would they sell? What would they have at the store?
well, it would be a small idea of lodge, a little bit of everything. And I think I can remember a sign where they had Plymouth Rock ice cream, and that goes back. And little trinkets. And there was another store and gas station up the street from that, was McGivry's. And Mrs. McGivry, they had a store. And they sold soda and candies and whatever.
Gumdrops.
Gumdrops, there you go. Do a hell of a job on your teeth. And beyond that, I worked my way back. There was by Peter Shields, by the Shields house, there was a little tea room there they built later on. And I think a couple of people operated that. And Mrs. Adams did originally. They had tea and whatever. And across the street from me, you could get a cold beer in Jermaine's. Right. I was too young. But anyhow, and they also had one up McCullough's on Harding Street, another cold beer place, going to dance on Saturday nights. We had quite an organization, quite a time up there. One continuous party. But then again, I was too young. I heard tales of that were down, I believe Bill Williamson had a store, him and his wife Annie, going down near Gene Nurse's house, right next, and to the Warners. And he was a reverend too. Bill Williamson, yeah. And he wore a great big tall hat like Abraham Lincoln. He'd come walking up the street, I'd be a little kid looking, I said, oh, the boogeyman. But they were wonderful people. And across the street we had Peter Vroom. Now Peter Vroom, a lot of people probably remember him. He'd wear a long raccoon coat and a derby hat, like Lauren Hattie used to. And he'd come up the street and run like hell in the house. But never underestimate that man. A lot of people didn't know what he done. He was in the Merchant Marines. He was very brilliant. In fact, he brought our fleet, most of our fleet, merchant fleet, back to the United States during the submarine attacks. And that was Peter Vroom. A lot of people used to kind of make fun of him. I never did after I heard them stories. Well, yeah, he lived with the Taylors. They were Levi Taylor. We used to call him the mayor up there. Well, everyone had a turn at being mayor. I didn't get hit with that until I moved down to Medfield. What a move that was. They made me mayor for a day and they made more appointments than anybody. That was a fun time. But yes, we had a lot of fun in Harding. There was a mill pond. Now, if I tell you where it is, now you say there's no water there. Well, there's plenty of water. That was a great big pond, wasn't it? We'd go skating, we made our own fun. We'd have a great time. Light a couple of tires on fire, you go home, you think it's on a minstrel show.
That's where they cut the ice out of that building.
Yeah, well, it was, they cut the ice out of that pond. They had a great big ice house on the other end, but they got the name of the right, that's in the wrong place. The ice house was way down the other end of it. And one night, I don't know what happened, must have been
You
lightning.
burned it down.
Must have been lightning. It went up in smoke. Did I?
You did.
Okay. But that was it. That was the old ice house, and you had plenty of ice. And then somebody made a refrigerator, and that blew that business. So I've been talking too much, haven't I? Why is it-
One more, did you, you guys use the Charles River at all?
Absolutely used the Charles River. You know, back in Medfield State Hospital was one of the biggest boathouses around here.
Right.
Yeah, you could go up there and rent a canoe for 25 cents for, well, you used to say an hour, but for all day, you know. And you never abuse that stuff, but you won't have one heck of a time. Get on the Narrows, go to, anyway, Natick, Millis. We were always on the river. Us kids up there on the river in the woods all the time, like a Davy Crockett. A lot of fun. Matt Malloy would come along. Yeah, and, yeah, we use the river a lot.
You could swim
One
in it.
short story. And that, during the Depression that was, and I was never a trapper, but used to trap skunks and things from the river, muskrats. And so we got brave. So there were a lot of skunks around the Medfield State Hospital, patients would feed them. So we go up there, and if you're fast, you had to be fast. You pick one of the babies up, and he wouldn't spray you. We would put him in a gummy sack, alive, and this other fellow used to save him. And when the pelts went up, he'd sell the pelts. So one night, God love him, Norman Quinn and I was with him. We were going up on the female side. You had a female side of the hospital and a male side. And so this big skunk runs up the back of this building. Neva says, I'll get him. And so he's going slow. And all this time, there's a lady looking out the window, one of the patients. And she let a howl at her. And I think the first one, the skunk went by me. Then next to us, Neva. Yes, we use the river. But another one, they'd have a dance, okay? There was a female side and a male side in the chapel. There was a big chapel up there. In fact, I used to go to mass up there, and so we all did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Sunday.
And but there was also, they could use for the patients for dances. And they had their own orchestra up there.
That's right, it was Nick Calvin, the
Yes,
Coleani.
yeah, beautiful orchestra.
His son is there, Matthew Coleani.
Very good, very good, yeah.
So Nick had the opportunity.
And so one of the attendants would get out in the middle of the floor, and the band would start playing, and he'd blow a whistle, he'd run like hell, they'd dive at each other. But it was a lot of fun. You waited for that whistle. It was something like the Patriots. I know, your girlfriend. Other than that, anything else?
Let me, Gene, what do you remember growing up?
Well, I hate to follow. It was a great place to grow up. We had all kinds of stuff, as John just told you. We went canoeing on the river, we had movies every Friday night. We had all manner of entertainment up at the hospital. We could play tennis up there, they had tennis courts. Baseball game, they had their own baseball team. That was one thing, if you were a baseball player, you had a good chance of being hired, because this was during the Depression. And also if you could play an instrument.
Oh, yeah.
Nick was always looking for someone for the orchestra, so that was a good in. But we had the mill pond for ice skating. And then after the hurricane of '38, do you remember they stored the logs in the mill pond?
Absolutely, I remember it well. Tell that.
Yeah, and then they had a portable sawmill that came there probably, I don't know, maybe in 1940. And they
Yeah.
lived in campers, it was one family,
Yes.
and they lived in trailers by the mill pond. And they sawed all the logs up, and then they stored them on Mason's Hill and English Land.
In my grandfather's field.
Yeah,
Well, they had them in the pond, they used to, they put them in the pond
they
for a
put them in
while.
the pond, yeah, and
'Cause
then
I
the
remember going
sawmill.
down there and you get on a log and you could walk your way across the pond.
Yeah, if you
Of
were
course,
brave.
we had a few ups along the way, but I mean,
And they marked US on the logs, and they made army barracks
Is that
out
what they
out
did
of
with
them.
them?
Yes, yeah. The government bought all
Yeah.
of them.
But anyway, but I often wondered, I don't think they had any sanitary facilities or anything, I wonder, you know?
in the pond.
I'm glad you brought that up.
But it was a great place really to grow up, we had, lots of fun.
Tell more about them houses that.
The House of Ill Repute?
Yeah. Where
That
were
was
they?
before our time, George.
Where was that
Oh,
one?
shucks.
That was across the tracks
In the Stone House?
At the Beehive?
no,
Heavens, no.
Well, what was the, tell us what the Beehive was.
That was Alice Crawford's
Crawford's-
place, yeah.
Crawford's Notch.
A lot of people lived there that worked at the state hospitals, probably 4 or 5 apartments in a big house, and they had 3 bungalows out back.
And that's just before West Mill Street.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, yeah.
That's still there
It's
today.
still there, but I don't know if anybody lives in it.
You had a
But you know,
common
and we had
bathroom
great
up there.
transportation there, we had the bus that went to Framingham, and the train that went to Boston, and the taxis, and we could always get around, you know? It was
If somebody
great.
skipped school or something, just hop that train if they
Yeah,
can.
just
you
go
know.
right there.
Tell us about that, George. Well, what do you people remember about the junction? Any train wrecks or accidents you remember?
There were several accidents on
Yeah,
the
a guy lost his life on one, right there.
There was a train up behind the state hospital that struck this lady, didn't see it coming. It was a lady and God love, a little baby in the back of this coupe. It was an old steam engine. And I happened to have my brother Paul with me. I had a big Cadillac.
Yeah.
And we heard something, a commotion, we went up there and, boy, what a mess. I mean, the poor soul, the lady was still alive, but she lost her limbs. And I remember there was a Father Moriarty down here in St. Edwards, and he was standing up on the locomotive trying to see how the baby was, but the baby was gone. But that train would shake and the priest would shake. That was a real bad. The poor engineer, I think he probably quit after that. His nerves were just.
What was that, Joe?
That was up behind the hospital.
Hospital crossing.
Yeah. I'm gonna try.
There was another one on the other crossing too, down by Ice.
West
Ice
Street.
Junction
There
there.
was a couple down there too.
Yeah.
Elation.
I saw that.
Yeah.
Waiting for my father to come
Yeah.
home and,
Is that
bus
14?
truck went flying up and
That was
little
Billy Cassidy.
train was there. Train kept on going.
Racing train.
Stopped.
Let
Very short.
me move to Tom. Tom, what do you remember best? Your dad was the postmaster, and what do you remember best of growing up there?
Yeah, growing up there was different. Because you were always under somebody's thumb, me. I was the oldest boy, and it was funny, I was thinking about it last night. And there were times that the treat was, the little job I had was to go to the post office, and I'd hand cancel some of the mail. My father had a hand cancel, it was like a hammer. And the cancellation, whack like that. And there was more than 100 letters, you'd go, whack. No, don't do that way, do it this way. All the way, and that was during Christmas time. The post office, you couldn't get in the door in Christmas time because all the mail came down from the state hospital and it was going to the state hospital. But you know, the funny thing was, it all came through Medfield and ended up in Harding. Because they would drop it off here because it was dropped off at Harding to go to the Medfield State Hospital, even though it was Medfield, Mass. But everything went through Harding. So, one of the things my father used to say to me, and I'm gonna give you this in a little while, is, he said, he had to sell enough stamps to keep the Harding post office open. In those days, that's how they kept the offices, that's how they did the auditing. And if the post office didn't sell enough stamps, they would go down in grade, or they would, if they sold more, they would go up in grade, and if they didn't sell enough, he was in the bottom, fourth class office, they would close you, and he would go off to another post office. He was the postmaster, but he would probably be like an assistant somewhere else, so. He would go solicit downtown the merchants to come up and buy their stamps. So all this, you'd have, well, I think, I'm trying to think of one of the big ones downtown. But anyways, some of the insurance guys would come up there and buy them. There were people in the state hospital, Josephine Baker, who was down the street, she was the treasurer of the state hospital, even though it was Medfield, she'd go down and buy the stamps at Medfield State Hospital out of Harding, so that kept the revenue up. And it was interesting how it went. And, you know, what Richard said, the appointment was made by the President of the United States. And it had to go through Congress. Every postmaster in the United States. There was no civil service when he went there. In fact, my father, I remember him telling me, just thinking about it, he went to 2 inaugurals for FDR. And he didn't go, he didn't get a job. Because there was another guy in the wings. And they had, you know, here we are. We had 4 kids, my mother, my grandfather, my Uncle Pat, the whole thing. We all lived in the house there, and we all had to eat. So, you know, there was a lot of sacrifice on his hands. And during that era, I went through the thing last night, and the post office, my mother was the clerk, my Aunt Edna was the clerk, Anna Murphy was the clerk, and I think, Margaret
Shields.
Shields. Now, all these young ladies, you know, there was a reason, you know, they needed an extra $1 because they had families, and my father would say, well, we'll have to get Ian here to help us out for Christmas, or whenever the busy season was. And that's how it worked up there. It was something else, you know, Harding was a real part of life. And they said the state hospital, well, that's what created Harding. But to continue it continued through to 73, I believe. And as the state hospital went away, so did Harding, the post office. And a lot of people wish they still had it today up there, because, you know, you don't get your mail probably till what, 2:30, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you know? And a lot of people would come down at the Christmas season, and there's a gentleman in this room, I think, that did it, his name is Harding, and they would have their Christmas cards hand-stamped Harding, Mass. Harding, Mass was the only one in the United States, from my understanding. And my father would have people send different things to them to have them, you know, cancel, and he'd hand cancel, and that was my job. So then there was one guy I can remember, he came from Saugus. He owned a lumber yard down there, and he'd come out every Sunday, open on Sunday, to get his mail, his Christmas cards out, and that would be like Thanksgiving on, and my father would hand cancel all of them. He'd probably have 150 cards, just him. And it was an interesting thing, the post office, because, you know, and then, oh yeah, the other job I had to take all the big mail sacks, put them down there, and put them underneath the thing. So I'd get a little tired, that was my bed. So I'd have a little nap in the mail sacks. And the other thing was that I got to know the rural carriers that would take the mail from Harding Post Office, and they would go to Needham to the train, because that's how they went those days. So the rural would pick it up, and this was the big truck. Okay, Tom, Tommy called me, says, you're going to Needham. Okay, in the truck I'd go, and we'd fly up. Next stop was Dover, then we go to Charles River. Then we go to Needham Junction, we'd unload the mail there, get on the train, take the train just come in, we'll take that mail, we start back again, we go all the way down to Bellingham, and then I get the next trip back, and I get home probably, I don't know what the hell time I got home. It was fun. But that was my life up there, and I had a lot, you know, a young guy, and as I got a little older, you know, I probably got in trouble, because, you know, you always got into trouble when you get a little older. There's a few guys in this room that we went fishing and down in the pond, and we'd probably fall in, you know, something like come home with, you know, drenched in the winter time, not the summer. And dungarees, if you can remember back then, they were stiff anyways, but you fell in. I came home one day and I couldn't walk because they were frozen stiff all the way up to the middle of the pond. But that was, you know, that was another thing we did. In the river, as they said, Matty Malloy and myself and the Nowers boys, we'd be down the river. You know, Matty'd be fishing, but I want to get that, you know, that motor going down there. And then we hit a rock out there, bust the pin on the motor, and then we'd have to roll back from the Narrows. And then the canoe house, like they talked about, the canoe house, we always saw the people down there, and they'd be down the river. Of course, we'd be putting by them, they'd be going. Maddie'd be rowing, I'd be rowing. Then we'd go over to the Sherman side, had cottages. A lot of people don't remember that. We used to go over across to the cottages across the river. And the people from the state hospital used to rent the cottages. And they used to row across the river to the hospital. In the wintertime, Mrs. Losman, who lived down by me, she used to skate across with her husband. They put their skates up and walk up the hill. She worked at the laundry. And you know, everybody, if you look at it, everybody had something, everybody worked at the state hospital. Everybody here had a relative. And that was amazing because very few people worked out of town, out of that neighborhood. They couldn't afford to. No cars, no whole thing.
This boathouse, was that privately owned, or was it
Well,
The hospital.
The hospital owned them.
Yeah.
Hibbett's.
hospital?
Hibbett ran.
Yeah,
After Hibbett
yeah.
ran it.
After
State
Hibbett.
had-
Yeah,
after
but-
Hibbett, yeah.
There was a patient that used to take your quarters and, yeah.
That, I have more arguments with him.
Yeah, it was beautiful to go up there and have a canoe.
Tom, you did a map, you wanna tell maybe?
Yeah, what I'm gonna do, I made 25 copies of a story, okay, of a map. I didn't get 25, so kind of spread it around. And what it is, I've got the map here, and it's comments, that people, take me one, I don't know where I am. And it's about 8 pages. And what I did is I coordinated the pages to my drawings, and made comments
Where
of
do
the
you
people
live, G?
on there. So it's the way I remembered Harding in when I was a boy, and the different things. So when everybody gets a copy, I'll go through it. And if, make comments, you want to add to it. But what I want to do here, with this here,
Yeah.
what I'm going to do, hopefully, I'm going to donate this to the Historical Society, okay? But input from the people who lived here in Medfield, if they would like to make comment on it, we're gonna put the comments on this, so this will continue, because I think this is a great document. I drew all these drawings from just through the.
Yeah.
So everybody got a copy of something? We got one copy over here. Unfortunately, there's
That was
only,
his own house.
here's something, I'm gonna bring this over.
Actually, our house was more here. It wasn't any
yeah.
Our house, and there's the Howard house across.
Okay, if you get to page 1, is, it says, boys, get out of the pond. And Mr. Malloy would know that because that was Mrs. Crawford yelling at us. Okay, and then we go along and, like Gene said, it was also known as Crawford's Pond. Now, the railroad, of course, they said it before, the Medway line, which goes across Harding Street, connected from Boston to Woonsocket.
Oh, yeah.
The second spur goes to the right,
Levi.
that goes from, would connect to the Mansfield, Framingham line. So we went a lot of things, and these connected. We were a railroad junction here, actually. Now, page 2,
What's the matter?
We're down to the Beehive, okay, which is known as Robert's Notch. And if you notice to the right, you boys get out of the pond, and that's Malloy again. And up there's a little, if you turn around this way, Herbie was a kid that was, Herbie was in a little bit of trouble every day. He knew Maud Washburn quite, like, by the first name. It said, go up to the post office and buy 10 stamps. Here's 25 cents, Herbie, bring back the change. And that tells the times. Okay, now the interest rate coming up here, page 3. And my thing around the neighborhood, I used to mow everybody's lawn. So I made a little lawnmower there, and on everybody's lawn, you see the lawnmower, that's the lawns I mow. And I think the most I made on each lawn was 75 cents, at least, maybe for all 3 lawns. And right here, my friend down here, Chet Werner, that was his house down there. And in back, Chet's barn, his father. In front of that, there was a cellar hole, and that was Williamson's house. That burned down, and they actually moved into the chicken coop. Yeah, you say you talked about 4 people, but you know, they made do. They did what they could do to survive. And it was all about survival. Now, up there in the back, we get to the Harlow setting in Olson, Neil Olson and Jenny Nielsen today. The barn up there, I remember that when the horse was out there. Mrs. Harlow had a horse. And I never got over to get to see the horse because somewhere there's a dog chasing me in this neighborhood. Every time, every house there's a dog, if you notice that. And the dog used to chase me out of there. I go on the other side to my cousin's house, George's. They had a dog. He didn't chase me too much, but when we went to Jack Tucker's to the right there, and they had a black dog. You never get over that house. Man, they had 2 daughters too. And there's, you're going up there, you see the nurse Elliott house. That's my friend Jean here. I mowed that grass. And you see the white fence. You see that today? I don't know if that white fence is still there. It came along Harding Street. And that was something that I used to sit on once in a while, and I had a summer ride downtown. There weren't too many cars in those days. I had a lot of sitting. Now, go to page 4. I kind of repeated this because this is Jean Nurse's house.
Right.
And Jean was looking at one of my pages, and she says, John, that's not really my house. It didn't show too good. So I went across the street and did a view from there. Now you look at there, there's my lawnmower. And there's an apple tree. We used to, Maddie Malloy and I used to have a couple of apples off of it. Mr. Nurse used to chase us from there too. And that dog, I don't think he liked us either. And if you see the little barn there, I always remember that barn for a reason. The smoke coming out of the chimney, and there was a light in the window. And if you see the little black, I've got color shots. I did these all in watercolor. I have colors here, and after the meeting come up, I'd show them to you. And I planted that as a yellow light. And then to the little tractor there was a farm-owned tractor that Mr. Nurse had. And Matty Malloy, I think he learned how to drive a tractor on that, and I think I probably helped him out. Then to the right, the garage there, I didn't put the garage. But the garage is, they used to walk all the way from the house here over to here to get to the garage, you know. Today they got them, you know, attached underneath, you can't even breathe, you walk out 10 steps, you're in the car. They used to walk a half a mile.
That's right.
And then if you see the view there in the back,
Okay.
that's Castle Hill in North Street. You were able to see from my house on Harding Street, Castle Hill, the house up top. And you always saw the light shining at night, this time of year especially. Now, page 5, we get into the proper Harding, downtown, where the post office was. And there, that house was owned by my grandfather, George Hinckley Sr. My mother was Elizabeth Hinckley Sweeney, and she used to say to my father, it's 6:45 a.m., it's time to get up. The breakfast is ready. Hurry up, somebody's parked in front of the post office. And he used to say, he'd yell out the door, I'll be right over after I eat. And then I told you about the postmaster and all the clerks. Now, we got Margaret, but Margaret was there, I couldn't remember her. She used to babysit me too, probably, like Edie. And then we had George Hinckley Jr.'s home. And my Aunt Edna, who was one of my favorites, she used to say, George, sweetie, go home before I kick you off. That's actual words. I mean, sorry. Edna she had a way with words. Then we had the water well out front, and my cousin Jane and I would go out there and grab the grapes this time of year, just, before the frost. And it was something else because we always got stung. And we'd go in the house, and Edna would be there with the vinegar. We'd be there like this, starting to blow up on all sides, heads getting bigger around here. So we survived. And over across the street there, you see the Smith house. Well, you see the bang bang? That damn Darm Sweeney's hunting again. Well, I used to go hunting down in the brook down below. And I forgot one day, and I pointed the gun, and all the pellets came up in Madeline Smith's house. And that's what she said. And then we get to page 6. And we start, this is going up Hardin Street. And this is where the Murphys live, the next one. And that one time belonged to, like Lenny said, Fred Smith Sr., and now the Murphy house. And if you see the garden across the street, that was George Hinckley Sr.'s garden. And above that, you see a big elm tree. There was a swing on it. Well, we used to go up there every afternoon with my cousins, and we used to swing on this tree. And he used to go way up. Yeah. Well, one of my cousins one day, and it might have been my brother, I don't know, he went up and he jumped off the swing. And Uncle George used to have his cesspool down below.
The christening.
Needless to say, he didn't come home that night. I think we kind of washed him off a little bit. And then we see the Tucker home, the former Harding post office. That's the stone house. And you see the dog? That's the dog that used to chase me out of the yard. And then Gene told me about Wolford's store. That's the store across the street. Interesting about Wolford's store, that was torn down, and Madeline Smith built her house from the lumber of Wolford's store.
That's right.
Yeah. Madeline, I didn't say any guys, did I? No, Madeline did. Herself, yes. She built the house herself. And then there, beside that, the McSweeney's house, they were an Irish couple, Cornelius and Delia. And before there, Lenny Haig's grandmother lived in there. That was the Hudson house. And then Freddie Smith, which was Lenny's cousin. There was a garden behind his house, which we remember. And beside that, there was a garage. Freddie Smith and Mike Haig. That was after World War II. They came home. Mike was an amputee. He lost his leg in Germany. And he came home, and big thing, he was always a mechanic. So he and Freddie went in business. No leg or no leg, Mike was under that car all the time. He was really, he was quite a mechanic. So then you go up up top there. And I've got numbered because it was so small in there. So I put the names of the different people, the different houses. And it goes all the way up to the state hospital, just above Kennedy's house there. So, but funny thing was, considered Harding, if you didn't have a mailbox at the Harding post office, you weren't considered from Harding because you got the rural route came through, and that came through Medfield, so you had it Medfield, Mass, Harding Street, Medfield, Mass. But my license, when I went to the registry for my first license, read Harding Street, Harding, Mass. We didn't have a zip code, we didn't have an address. So I got stopped by an officer one day for, I forget what it was. I think somebody stood up in my convertible, and it was down in Islington. And he says, okay, I pulled over. Give me a license registration. He looks at it, he says, Harding, Mass? He says, where the hell's that? And I'm stuttering, because I was only probably about 17. I just got my license, and I says, part of Medfield. Wait a minute, I gotta get on the radio, this one. He goes over, he didn't believe me. He never knew where Harding was. I think the guy never knew where Westwood was. Because in those days, some of those guys came out from Boston to work on the police force, you know? So finally, he come back to the thing, he says, well, I guess you told the truth, you better slow down and tell the kid in the back seat to keep seated. No seatbelts, you know, where we had the convertible. So then we got, oh yeah, we're gonna go up to, now, in the corner of Harding and Hospital Road, there was a huge elm. In those days, you know, it's funny, every one of the crossroads or the corners had a big tree. And a lot of times what when they had a notice to be put out by the town, the notice was put on those trees. And the deputy would come out, and the deputy would knock on it, town meeting coming, that's where they would kneel. And they would kneel at the post office too, it was one inside the post office, in the different corners in Medfield. And next to that, well, there's now number 10, that's where the makeover house is. Okay, that was the Banks house. That's where the Malloys lived, in the Banks. And then next to that was one of the McGivry houses, number 8, the McGivry house. They always call that the new McGivry house. It was probably built, what, in the 40s? Maybe early 50s, yeah, 40s?
The new one, yeah.
During
Yeah,
World War
the
II.
new-
They-
yeah, the
they-
new house,
probably
right?
the first house built in
Yeah.
And the two next were owned by an engineer at the hospital, Myron Place, and his daughters lived in one house, and he and his wife lived in the other house. That was something, because, you know, a lot of people lost their houses during the Depression, and they rented. Harding, I think my father told me, all the way from Harding Street up to my grandmother's house were rented houses. And some of them were vacant for years, and then people never lived in them. And, the Olson house, I thought they were ghosts over there. Jenny Olson tells me there still are ghosts there, by the way.
That was
But-
haunted.
The haunted house, right?
It was
They
a
talked
haunted
about it,
house,
but, you know, these people never sold these houses. Somehow they got title, and they bought the houses. And then, yeah, the place in McGivry, Peterson Place, that was the, then above that,
Did you ever see any
we
ghosts
had the
over there?
Shields',
No, but we used to
and,
go there.
they were an Irish family, and their house was too small. They bought the restaurant out in front, and some of the boys lived in the restaurant. Yeah, that was the tea room. Yeah, and then the barn, across the street, that was O'Donnell's, and he was an oil man on the side. He worked at the hospital, and on the powerhouse, and he had an oil truck, and he'd go fill it up, and he'd go deliver oil around everybody's house. And then Charlie Haig, that's Lenny's father, had a house right there, it's number 1. But I learned also from Lenny, talking, after I did the map, that Lenny's father owned the last house on the right before you hit the fields on Harding Street, the hospital. There were 3 lots there, garages, which the people rented from the hospital, they parked their cars in there, and then the garage there, which that looks like a small, big building there. And when I was a kid, that was an Esso station, and it was a Ford dealership. And everybody shook about that, but we think it was a little mafia going on too. These guys came from Rhode Island, and, you know, they disappeared pretty quick too, as the dealership did too. But then there was a little restaurant out front, where, I'm trying to think of, before the Knowles' house there, on Harding Street. The guy put a big addition on it. It was it was probably about 8 feet wide by 20 feet long.
That was the come on in.
Come on in.
Yeah.
And that, originally, that house was actually a big chicken coop up in the back, and Jim Tubbity moved it down. You remember Jim Tubbity, the
Yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah.
cleverest guy in the world.
He surely was.
Rolled it down, and they built the, well, actually, they didn't make the thing any bigger,
No.
but they made it for a restaurant with a kitchen in it, and the person that ran the restaurant, she had a bedroom in the back.
Yeah, cake cobbler.
Cake,
They
yeah.
call it, yeah.
Yeah. Great French fries.
You notice how George knew all the women.
You know?
And I
Don't mention,
remember,
don't mention them houses again.
I don't know if he took me in there or not, because, you know, he was my cousin, you know, and he probably once in a while dragged me along. And I used to go up there and get an ice cream.
There you go.
And that was the big thrill in those days, to go in there. That was the only restaurant I remember. These guys are a little older than I. Yeah, a little bit, right, yeah.
I was old enough to play the pinball machine.
That's right.
That was good.
I couldn't stand on, up at Bilkey's. But up at the state hospital, that was another thing too. That was my playground too, is they guys too, but I had a different thing. I had the Nowis boys. Their father was the head farmer. So I was allowed to go up there, and we would drive tractors, learn how to drive tractors. Malloy would be up there driving a tractor, learn how to, there were different things you did, And then the best one of all, and I still remember to this day, there was an old, he was a German a patient up there, and his job was to drive the manure wagon. And he used to drive from the cow barn to the manure pile, and that was his job all day long. And every time we go in, the kids would go in there, okay, there goes Dolph, his name was. He'd go by us, and by the time we go home at night, Dolph was coming back. And you'd get that all day long, and you wondered how the guy ever did it. It was just something. It was, you say to your people today, people's jobs and work and everything. And it reminded me, because I watched television the other night, they had this thing, and the women were over in Russia, they were planting cow manure, and they were planting the potatoes, and it was just, back then, that's what they did.
Anybody else. So it was really good money. You had to work 6 days though. It was a 48-hour week back then.
What do you remember, what was up there? What were they growing? What was up there?
They grew the vegetables and the milk. They had milking cows. You had to take a churn in there. I mean, God, 3 times a day, those things had to be milked. But they fed all the state hospitals in the state from that farm, a lot of them. All the vegetables were shipped out, the meat, and everything.
Yeah.
And it was a good job back then. And the only other good job up that end was the brickyard, which I think everybody in town had to. Now there was a spook house. I mean, even the cops were afraid to go down there later.
Now, wait a minute, explain, where was the brickyard? What was it? You want to tell a little bit about that?
The old brickyard.
The brickyard was down off West Street, across the right, where they got all those little buildings there.
Just past Will's Hardware area.
Yeah, just past there. And there was a lot of wetlands in there too, but you'd never know it now, because I think they moved it back a little bit. And then they had a big pit across the street where all those houses where Carol Mayer and them lived. I mean, you couldn't see them, it was so deep. They had a big steam shovel down there and everything. I mean, that brickyard, I remember working down there at night. Back then, the prisoners, if they escaped, they'd walk the tracks, and the patients would walk, all the hobos would walk those tracks. You'd be down there in the middle of the night, they had these tunnels down there inside where the bricks would be pulled through. And and when you baked the bricks, there was only one guy on it. Well, when I got there, there used to be 3 shifts. But when I got there, you had to be there in the middle of the night baking those bricks. And they had the time clock way the hell on the other end of the place. They had to walk all the way up and walk through these tunnels like where you pull the brick carts.
The first time.
And I always walked with a
Then
big
they
still
opened it
switch.
again.
I mean, and the rats down there were as big as cats. I'd be sitting down there cooking the bricks, and you'd be blowing the water in it, and heating the water to do it, and the safety valves would blow, and then that's when you'd crack the valve to start cooking them, and it was all coal fired. You had to shovel it. We had a guy named Phil Minnis come in late at night. He used to come in after us. And had a nice police officer. It was an old tin building. It was high, probably 3-4 stories high. And one of our fine police officers used to come down there and throw rocks at it, bounce them off the top, and go, So that's all the guy could talk about the next day. Something's going on down there.
There was a boogeyman down there.
Going through. But that was a good job back then too. Hard, you had to pick up stacked bricks, stick them out. But the hospital, they used to take the patients out to cook, to pick all the vegetables. So you drive the tractor and they'd all be sitting in the back and you take them down there and they'd jump off and they'd pick all the vegetables and you'd take it back. Then they'd take them back up to the hospital.
Yeah.
I mean, there was probably, what, 1,500, 1,800 patients up there?
Oh, yeah.
Actually, there were more people up the north end than there were on the other end of town.
Oh,
It's like 2,500,
Yeah.
2,500 people at the
At the
hospital.
hospital.
There's less than that in the town.
I mean, and the good thing about back then, everybody knew everybody in the whole town.
Yeah.
You just knew everybody. I mean, every kid, every person. Of course, if you got in trouble, everybody knew who the hell you were.
I didn't do it.
Yeah.
That was that's was his brother, yeah.
And if you went down the other end of town where Medfield was, they'd ring that, what is it, the horn?
Oh, yeah.
At 9 o'clock, that meant everybody had to get off the streets
Oh,
at curfew.
yeah.
They had a curfew. And they had Nick the enforcer that would do it.
With his big foot.
Yeah. Yeah, back then he just grabbed, I said move.
Let me, one of the other speakers who wanted to be here and grew up in Harding was Doug Werner. And unfortunately, he is sick this evening, and he did leave a couple of notes. I'm just going to read a couple of them, and if it reminds you of something, just add on. But he talks about the 1938 hurricane. It said some men came to the mill property. They sawed the logs into boards. One of them was named Johnny Johnson, another Hugh Campbell. We were fascinated with what the men could do with the logs. There used to be a barn next to our house where Bill Williamson had a store. I remember going there to buy penny candy. It says across from Crawford's was the apple orchard owned by Mrs. Bing. She often told my father that he could pick the apples there any time. Said Papa had a hand-crank cider mill. He used to make apple cider from the apples from her orchard and also from Norse's apple trees.
See?
You were over there, Gene, right?
Gee, you used to pick apples, didn't you?
He talks about the Haggs living next door to the Rock House, as he calls it, on Hospital Road. And Mike Haig, you talked about, had a garage up the street, always before he went into the service. They talk about my brother Richard, who worked for Mike. Richard Werner went on and was killed in World War II. His plane was shot down and the body was never found. And that square now with the intersection of Harding Street and West Mill Street is now named in honor of Richard Werner, who actually had polio, correct? And even despite of that, he fought to get in the service as a pilot, correct? No, a gunner.
Yeah.
A rear gunner. And I think Doug told me that at first they rejected him because of the polio, and he insisted, I don't need legs to be a gunner.
Right.
And he still went into the service. He talks about, my family had a flexible flyer back in the late 30s and 40s that 5 of us siblings shared. We would go sledding down the hill by Postmaster Tom Sweeney's backyard with the neighborhood kids. Those were good old days. Another memory was seeing a variety of beautiful lilacs in bloom at the Arnold Arboretum that our English teacher, Mrs. Dixie Davis, took my senior class there on a class outing.
Edie.
He talks about that he can remember all the names of his grade school teachers. Mrs. Daladario, Miss Murphy, Miss Crombie, Miss Buck, Miss Alch, A-L-A-C-H, who was fired when the school board found out she was a member of the Communist Party.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
It
I
said,
remember that.
Mrs. Nelson took her place. Mrs. Brown was then the principal of the Hannah Adams Pfaff Grammar School and our 6th grade teacher. We heard and witnessed quite a few accidents on the railroad crossing, freight trains that went by mostly during the day. We took great care to learn their schedules as we loved to walk the tracks. We used to go swimming in the Charles River at the railroad trestle. My brother Richard rescued a Lawrence Moran from drowning when they were swimming there once. Miss Morse gave Richard a tool chest as a present that Christmas because she thought he should be rewarded for saving Larry. My brother Doug rescued me from drowning when I fell through the ice one time. He kept watch over me as my mother probably asked him to. It said we had a wonderful childhood. We didn't know we were poor, as we were never hungry. My father always planted a garden. We had chickens, and it was hard work. And my mother canned and was a good cook and worked at home for others. They both looked out for us 5 children and loved us unconditionally. So that was from Doug Werner. Last thoughts. What else? Any other stories or anything else from Harding? We start with Tom and I'll move right down.
Yeah, one thing about the garden at Thorn's, right? The 1950s hurricanes, my brother used to always go down to visit Mr. Werner. And they were pals. And the whole garden flooded because the brook flooded. They went under the railroad tracks. The beavers got at it and blocked it up. So it all came up and there was corn. It was like, over Mr. Werner's head. He couldn't go there. So George and some of the other guys, I guess, went down there, swam out, dived down, got the corn, tomatoes, everything out of the garden, brought it up. Yeah, you talk about,
I don't think many people.
ingenuity, right? But that was one of the things I don't forget there. Yeah.
Gene, last story. Anything else you remember from?
No, not much else. I think it's pretty much covered. One thing I do remember, you talking about the skunks.
Oh, yeah.
Norman.
Yeah.
And Norman Quinn, his mother worked nights at the state hospital. His father had died early on. So Norman used to stay at our house nights. And oh my Lord, he would come home. My mother said, Norman, you go in the shed and you change your clothes before you come in. Oh my, he reeked of skunks.
Yeah.
And it was just about every night.
Oh, well, yeah, business was good.
That was, oh. Anyway,
It's like the guy that worked in the fish store, never had a date.
Any other last stories, Judge? That's a loaded question.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of history everywhere. You know that as well as I do. But McCullough's up there on Harding Street, where Mr. Wiley Scribner lived up there. Well, McCullough's had a barroom. Then they all moved out and the house was vacant. Now, World War II came along. As I understand, I remember the people, but they didn't stay long.
the Rileys.
Yeah, they were spies.
They weren't.
Yes. Now that's a true story.
They were spies for who?
Yeah, for Germany. Yeah, yeah.
Other side of the river.
2 doctors and his wife and little child.
They were German spies?
There you go. And they were all gone the next day. Mr. FBI. Yeah. Dr. Zeiberlich was one. Yeah, that's a true.
Right.
When did they live there?
Oh, that must have been late 30s. Late 30s, yeah. And then the old WBZ radio station had a transmitter down
Oh,
here.
yeah.
And they sent,
Do you want to explain where that was?
well, that was by the ghostly brickyard, but right on the Millis line almost.
On the river.
Yeah, up by the river. And there was always afraid it was going to get bombed, which there was radio, big stuff. And so they sent a regiment of soldiers out there, and they stayed quite a while. And guarded the towers up there.
What else did they have? They had some prisoners too, right?
Prisoners?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know about prisoners, but they didn't take any there.
They had spies
I
there
was
too.
told they had some German prisoners there.
Where?
They could have, yeah.
so.
They were probably visiting the spy.
They used to have the R&R down the Manor Inn.
Oh, the Francis.
Pickwick on tap, he said. Yeah, but, no, there's a lot of history. A lot of people didn't know that one. Because, yeah.
Lenny, the other,
Just, well, nothing about Harding, but my father was head of the civil defense
Yeah.
during World War II. And I remember being downtown and Mr. Eyre, he was the minister of the church. Well, everybody's got the lights off and the curtains pulled and everything. And he had a fire going in the fireplace, and it was like it was outside, you know, you could see. We call up, well, we're trying to get it out, we're trying to get it out. Of course, my father said, he spoiled the whole thing.
Lenny, tell them about your secret hideaway. You and Mike had that cabin down there at the junkyard.
What hideaway? Well, that was, what he's talking about,
I know the one.
my brother, he used to sleep in with my father. Well, my brother got home one night, kicked the alarm clock, and, oh, talk about World War III. I'm gonna move out of here. So he did, he built a one-room place down there behind the house, because there was a lot of land down in the back. And, that's where he lived there. Well, back to, when he went into World War II, he was living there.
Nice pad, too.
Oh, well, rustic.
Yeah, our own little town, but I remember, especially when I went into the service, I'd get mail, and they'd have that Harding stamp on it. A kid handed me a letter one day, said, where the hell's Harding? I said, it's right after Sherburne. Then he'd say, where's Sherburne? But I'd never say I was from Medfield to them guys. And so we got back to Fort Devens. We all had about 6 more months to go, so I used to commute back and forth. I bought an old car, went up there. So these guys from Boston one day said, I want to see where the heck you live. So they drove me home. Here we come, right by the Harding post office. Wow. I said, I told you. Yeah, so we had a lot of fun with that. I surely did. Yeah.
and Paul, any last stories or thoughts?
The only last thing I can remember is every November, they'd have a fox hunter would come right through our yard, go across in between Smith's and Murphy's house, all the people with their little red
Out of the hunt
gowns
club?
on, with all the dogs. This was back in.
From Norfolk Hunt Club?
Yeah, in the late 40s, I mean, you know, we had Russell cars.
They go down beside our house.
Yeah, they get down there, and because back then it was all fields and very few houses up in, I mean, you didn't want to trick or treat up in Harding, there was no. So,
They did that through the 50s.
Yeah.
Norfolk Hunt.
Hunt.
We're still doing it through the 50s.
And then they'd get out by the pump station and get over to the
Tally ho.
Tally ho, that's what they were doing.
Yeah,
And probably hitting a few nips on the way too.
that's what the red coat was for.
You know,
Final
we want to
Tom,
wind this up, so there's one little thing I want to say. Is now you know the rest of the story, almost.
Yes.
Harding will always be there,
Oh, yeah.
but the people are gone. Anna Murphy was the last real Hardingite.
Hold on, I'm still there.
Not in the same house. No, but no.
You're downtown, I'm still
Wait
in
a
Harding.
minute now. Did you get the mail out of the mailbox lately?
Huh?
Down the RFD, did you go downtown? Oh, yeah, sure.
I don't have anybody tell me.
Turncoat.
I pay my bills, I don't mail.
any questions, people have?
How did your father start
started for St. Edward's Church, actually.
Oh, is that how it's done?
Yeah, yeah, St. Edward's, and what they did was, Father Shea, I think, went to them, and they, yeah, and they wanted to make some, they needed some money, so.
Yeah.
My father had the idea, and he got the young fellow over here, and Lenny was in them.
Well,
Oh,
I couldn't carry a tune in a suitcase, but I sang.
we had down at the nurse house,
Yes,
2 terrific tap dancers,
that's right,
Gene and her brother Billy, and they were good.
yep.
Back in the
Yeah.
day.
But
Remember
that's
that?
where it all started, there. And then a senior class somehow went to them and, you know, and went on from there. And that's how they made their money to go to Washington on the trip. My father would run the minstrel show, and my mother would help him. In the state hospital, they used to play it up there, yeah. And they went to Boston State too. They went to,
It was a traveling show.
that's right. And believe these guys traveled.
I'll never-
Lightheaded too.
I'll never forget when we went into the Boston State Hospital. And so I said, Bill Mann was there too. And so he says, why don't we make up first? And then we won't have to put it on in there. Well, we did. And guess who got a flat tire in that? And you know where. I never seen a tire get changed so fast.
Never a dull moment.
Any other questions?
Gene's father was instrumental in
Oh,
having one of the best drum and bugle corps in the state.
Yeah, we were really good. Yeah.
My father was
Very
instrumental
good.
in
Yeah.
forming
Yeah.
the American Legion drum and
Yeah,
bugle.
you're right, Phil. Yeah.
Yep.
Mr.
This thing when I'm on my feet. State Hospital had one of these teams they brought in from outside. And they brought in fellas, real good ball players. But Herbie and the Plumbos, the Ifolas, they went up there and they pretty good games on. And Brownie brought all these guys in from Walpole and everywhere. And the American Legion, those called the Townies, they went up there, not professional players, but they went up there and they showed their, where they think they beat them maybe 1 out of 10. But the other thing is, the true final story is, those are the organized teams, but I'm just gonna leave on the table to Mr. Hinckley. There were 2 teams, one organized team, one team that wasn't organized in the manner of uniforms and everything. There was a representation from the north, and there was a representation from the town.
I can see where he's going with this one.
Some of the organizations, there's no names mentioned on this. I'll leave the rosters open. The team from the Harding section, I think, was called the
Harding
Rhinos.
Wino.
The team from the Medfield section was called
The Knickerbocker.
Brewers.
Doers
I won't mention any
Brewers.
names. It was the Winos versus the Brewers disorganization.
You had to have a purple nose to get on the wino.
Any other questions?
When did the train stop running out through Medfield Junction, or Harding Junction?
I used to take the train to Boston, and that was 1957, into school. It would go from Medfield Junction, okay, start up, and it would go to Needham Junction. Then you'd exchange to the train into town. And that's the last time, that was 57 through to 58, I went.
Really?
Yeah. And a lot of people downtown at that time, the guys in the insurance industry, they would drive up to the junction, get the train into town, get off at Back Bay. They would go Ruggles Street, they got off Back Bay, and then downtown, down the South Station. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I just like to know where they were when the ice house on 4th of July was caught on fire.
Well, I was too young to remember that.
I wasn't born.
What fire, Edie?
I know who did it.
And Gene's not saying anything.
Nice round of applause. Thank you very much. There's all kinds of photographs up here. You can talk to them. There's refreshments in the back. Thank you so much for coming.
Production support provided by Medfield.tv. Access to our community.